Minister, I am a proud Dubliner. I was born and bred in this city. I raised my own family here. This is a city of positivity, a vibrant city full of decent, hard-working people who believe in community. Like all Dubliners, I am heartbroken by what happened here last Thursday. How, in the name of God, did we come to this? 3 young children and their carer stabbed outside their school in broad daylight. It's every parent's worst nightmare. Our hearts go out to those children, their parents and their families, especially the little 5-year-old child fighting for her life. As those poor children were being taken to hospital, a mob of thugs set about destruction and mayhem. They were allowed to take control of Dublin city centre. Your assertion that nobody saw this coming is a water-weak defence. Everybody saw it coming, Minister, and for months. When the news broke that children were stabbed, people held their breath for even a hint that the perpetrator might not be Irish. They knew this would be exploited by those who seek to sow hate, division and mayhem. Very soon after the attack, organised agitators were on the scene, working their phones, starting to plan the havoc that unfolded. It was obvious to everyone on the ground that this orchestration was happening. In fact, a member of Mary Lou MacDonald's team brought it to the attention of Gardaí at the scene. People could see them organising through social media. At 2:04, Minister, I messaged my own sister-in-law who works in the Rotunda to warn her. I was in Dublin, Minister. I was here in Leinster House and I could see this escalating. How did you not see and feel what was coming? Incredibly, the only people who didn't see this coming were yourself, your government colleagues and the Garda Commissioner. We needed a decisive, early and quick public order policing intervention to contain the trouble and nip it in the bud. That is not what we got. Spokespeople for the GRA say that there was no plan, no central instruction given to Gardaí, that frontline Gardaí showed up to help because of WhatsApp messages sent to each other. This was an unprecedented, catastrophic failure of leadership on your part and on the part of Commissioner Harris. The public were placed in the way of danger. Ordinary workers, emergency responders and frontline Gardaí isolated, exposed and set upon. You lost control of Dublin city centre. It was mob rule. Yet you say the Gardaí had the resources needed to respond quickly and with force. Denial. You refuse to accept that control of the city centre was lost. Delusion. You say that the streets of Dublin city centre are safe. Make-believe. Tell that to the children, parents and staff at Gaelscoil Coláiste the Wirra. Yesterday, those children came out of school. They were greeted with the sight of an intoxicated stranger who had urinated on himself and not a single Garda around. 6 days after these little children were traumatised by the brutal stabbing of 3 of their classmates and their carer. Just think of the fear this created for those children and for their parents. Minister, what happened to those children is not normal. Nobody expects a guard to be posted at the door. What they do expect, though, is visible, strong, active community policing in the vicinity of the school. They did not get that. Not a single lesson has been learned, Minister, because you are not listening. In any other walk of life, in any other organisation, the person presiding over such a colossal failure would be sacked. Clearly, you are not the person to restore people's confidence in public safety. Your position is completely untenable. You should resign.
Minister, please.
Thank you, Corlia. Can I just say at the outset, my thoughts are still very much with the young girl, with her carer, both of whom are critically ill in hospital. What happened, those children, what happened at school is an unimaginable tragedy. And my thoughts are with them, they're with their family, they're with the school and with the wider community. What we saw unfold after that appalling tragedy was a small group of people who do not represent me, who do not represent the vast majority of people in this country, who took that appalling tragedy and used it to sow division, to sow hatred, to spread fear in this city, and to loot and to riot. They are thugs, and I will say it again, those responsible for inciting that hatred and that violence, those responsible for attacking members of An Garda Síochána, for setting buses on fire, they will be held responsible and they will be brought to justice. What we also saw, Ceann Comhairle, was the largest mobilisation of our public order units. What we also saw were over 400 members of An Garda Síochána coming together to respond to these thugs. What we saw was, in a very short space of time, these thugs being contained into a small part of our city centre. Yes, what we saw was devastating. Not one of us ever imagined we would witness what we witnessed, but they were contained by members of An Garda Síochána. What we also saw were other teams of An Garda Síochána protecting those who were trapped in their business, protecting those who couldn't leave their work, and we also saw members of An Garda Síochána protecting minority groups and those in international protection centres. We saw the largest response and mobilisation of An Garda Síochána in response to this horrific event. What we also saw were members coming from across the country. I have a report from the Garda Commissioner outlining what happened, outlining how he and his team responded, and as part of their response, yes, it was about sending messages to people as quickly as possible. And as part of that plan, it does include WhatsApp. How do you contact somebody as quickly as possible? But we also saw people literally getting into their cars because they wanted to support their colleagues. The two are not mutually exclusive. We saw the best of An Garda Síochána coming together to protect our city and to protect those in it. And we owe them a debt of gratitude. And of course, there will be lessons learned. An event, a catastrophic event of this size, there will be lessons learned, and there should be, and An Garda Síochána and we as a country will be the better for it. When it comes to the school and those children, I have been in contact with the principal numerous times. I have been in contact with An Garda Síochána, not just the Commissioner, but local Gardaí in Store Street. And let me reassure colleagues, let me reassure above all the parents of those schools, the staff of that school, every resource that they require will be made available. Gardaí are there. They will be stationed there. It's not for me or you or anyone in this House to decide how policing should operate. But Gardaí are working with and engaging with that school to make sure that whatever need they have, whatever support they require, that it will be made available to them. Because no matter what we discuss in here, at the end of the day, they are the most important people that matter in all of this.
Minister, you are not, and you cannot be, the person to provide the leadership necessary to resolve these issues, because you will not even acknowledge that control was lost in Dublin city centre for several hours. So you talked about what we won't forget. We won't forget the sight of a lone Garda on O'Connell Street beset on all sides and terrified. We won't forget what the GRA said, that there was no plan. And we won't forget that the Minister, who is supposed to provide leadership, does not even seem to understand the scale of the problem. Minister, this is what greeted those children 6 days after that traumatic and horrific event that happened to 3 of their classmates and 1 of their staff members. The school is terrified and traumatised. The school community want answers and leadership, and they are getting neither from you. This picture represents what Dublin City feels like to Dubliners. On your watch, Minister, you should resign.
Minister, please.
Deputy, I think we all have a role to be responsible in this House, and I think you should consider that before you start waving pictures around. You've said a lot of things, Deputy. Your party has said a lot of things. Your leader has said a lot of things since last night, since last Thursday. Not a single solution, not a single proposal, not a single thing of benefit has come out of your mouths since last Thursday. Instead, you have used a tragic situation to sow division, to point score, and to create instability. I thought for a second, Ceann Comhairle, last week when I rang all of the members all of the deputies in Dublin Central. I thought for a split second that we would be united in our determination to face down these absolute thugs who wreaked havoc in our city centre for a period of time. Instead, what we had, less than 24 hours later, was your leader standing on the edge of a criminal scene, calling for heads. That's what we saw.
Please.
When I spoke to the Garda Commissioner last week, when I spoke to Garda members, I spoke to them to offer my support. When your deputy, when your leader rang the Garda Commissioner, it was to call for his head. When people in this country want stability, all you are interested in is providing instability.
Thank you,
That's
Minister.
the difference between us and you. That's the difference between this government and your party.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Ivana Patrick,
please.
please.
That's all you can say.
Please, order.
Minister, I know we all continue to keep the victims of Thursday's awful attacks uppermost in our thoughts, and in particular the child and the care worker still in hospital. But all of us now, and especially those of us in Dublin, are still waiting for a clear message from you about what real action you and your government are taking now to make the streets safe. We know the problems. There are simply not enough Gardaí and not enough visible Gardaí, not enough support for frontline Gardaí, forced to communicate, it seems, by WhatsApp. And there's been a hands-off approach to policing the far right for far too long. Now, government TDs have been quick to accuse others of grandstanding, of distracting from the crisis facing us. And undoubtedly there's been grandstanding from opposition, including waving of a photograph of an identifiable person in this House. That's an outrageous action. That's outrageous action. That's outrageous grandstanding. And I want to call that out. I want to call out the waving of a photograph of an identifiable individual in our streets in this House. I think that's wrong. But I also think we've seen grandstanding from those in government, from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael members, who are desperately seeking to evade accountability by churning out calls which will do anything but address the real crisis facing policing. We've heard red herring calls, like cuts to benefits, like facial recognition technology, water cannons, dogs, more police powers. And we warned yesterday, Minister, you can't legislate your way out of this crisis. It's not about that. Nor can you distract us with political theatre, like asking the policing authority to provide clarity on the use of force. That's a farcical question, because we know that the Garda Commissioner and senior management are responsible for providing the training and guidance to Gardaí on proportionate use of force. So, Minister, the policing authority is not a legal advisor. Who has made this request and why? Was it the Commissioner who asked for clarity on the use of force, or is it merely a distraction tactic from you? Because what people really want now is reassurance that our streets will be safe, that attacks and riots will not happen again. We need accountability and we need more visible policing, not grandstanding from opposition or from government. The Garda Commissioner, Minister, is in charge of policing operations in the state, and you're politically responsible for policing. And last year, government, whole of government, on your advice, extended the Commissioner's term of appointment to 2025. Under your combined watch, Garda numbers in Dublin have fallen, 200 fewer Gardaí now on the streets than there were in 2020. Law and order being eroded across the capital city streets and across our country. A triple crisis within the Gardaí. I spoke on this yesterday, of morale, of recruitment, of retention, an overwhelming majority of rank and file with no confidence in their leadership, and more Gardaí simply leaving the force. A record 114 guards who resigned up to the end of September, and 851 voluntary retirements in the last 3 years, the force being hollowed out. So, Minister, you need to address morale issues and you need to make training more attractive. Our communities need more Gardaí on the streets with a functioning leadership and real political accountability. Can you tell us, did Garda Commissioner Harris ask for clarity on use of force, or was that your idea? What are you and the Commissioner doing to stop Gardaí from resigning? And at any point since Thursday, has the Commissioner offered to resign himself after what was a complete breakdown of law and order on the streets of Dublin?
Minister, please.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you for your contribution. I fully agree. I don't think this is a time for grandstanding and waving pictures. And again, I would suggest to the opposition that they should think about what exactly they're trying to achieve here. To respond to your question about our capital city, because there's a lot of talk about the capital city belonging to any one individual. This is all of our capital cities. There's not one of us that weren't devastated by what happened last Thursday, that weren't devastated for those children and their families, and weren't devastated by those scenes that we saw on O'Connell Street. But I have been listening. I have been listening to members of the community, in Dublin, city centre and beyond. I've been listening to businesses, I've been listening to colleagues, I've been listening to women when they tell me that some of them don't feel safe in our city centre, not just in the last 4 days, not just since the summer, but since I became Minister. That's why we have 2 stations opened that weren't open before I was Minister in our city centre. That's why we have 10 million in additional funding for Gardaí for our city centre. That's why we have a partnership that has been established in our city centre, acknowledging that safety is not just about An Garda Síochána. That's why we have Operation Citizen, which was launched to ensure that we have high visibility policing. That's why the vast majority of members that have come out of the Garda College and those new recruits this year have gone to Dublin. That's why we're introducing body-worn cameras for Gardaí. That's why we need facial recognition to make sure that the thugs that were involved last Thursday, that it doesn't take months to identify them. All of the work that I have been doing is because I have been listening to the concerns that people have. The zero tolerance strategy, responding to concerns that women have in our towns, in our cities, those who are vulnerable. It is to make sure that people not only feel safe, but that they are safe in our city centre. And I will do more. I know there's more that needs to be done. There's more that needs to be done to support our shopkeepers, those who are victims of theft, those who feel that their staff are not safe. And that's why I've been working closely with An Garda Síochána, and not just businesses here in Dublin, in Cork, in Limerick, in Galway, in my own county in Meath, where I've met with them, where I've listened, where I've heard their concerns, because the challenges we have here in Dublin, they're replicated. The challenges that we face in other cities. But I am absolutely committed, not just because of what happened on Thursday, because I, like every person in this House, wants to make sure that those who live in our capital city, that those who visit our capital city, that they are safe and that they feel safe. In terms of working with the Garda Commissioner, in terms of the asks that I have of the Policing Authority, I've met with Garda members as recently as the weekend, and they say that they feel that they are looking over their shoulder whether or not they can use appropriate force. And I do not want any member of An Garda Síochána, when they find themselves at risk, protecting themselves and others, I do not want them questioning their own judgment. This is not about questioning the training. This is not about questioning An Garda Síochána or Templemore. This is about providing clarity for all of our members so that when they find themselves in these difficult situations, they don't have to think twice. It's not about interfering in the work of anybody else. I do not want Garda members looking over their shoulder at any stage.
Deputy Patrick.
Well, Minister, with respect, you didn't answer my questions, and certainly this issue did not start around last Thursday afternoon. We know about these issues in the Gardaí that have been building up for so long around morale, around recruitment, around retention. We saw a lack of Gardaí on the ground, not just last Thursday night, but we've been seeing it for some time now. Guards who have to rely on WhatsApp messages to call on colleagues to come into town last Thursday, but we've seen issues around policing in Dublin being run on overtime for some time, and policing nationwide being run on a shoestring, being run by Gardaí who feel they do not have legitimate and requisite supports. And Minister, it's not good enough. I did ask you whether the Commissioner had offered to resign, and I do ask you again. And we believe there must be accountability and there must be adequate support for Gardaí. When the barricades come down from around Leinster House and when the temporary measures you're putting in place for December have run out, what is being done to ensure adequate supports in place for the Gardaí? What measures are you and the Commissioner going to take on this? Are you going to increase the training pay for Gardaí? It's simply unacceptable that trainees do not get the full starting salary, and we're calling on you to encourage more Gardaí to come into the force, Deputy. And we're calling on you to provide the necessary supports and the necessary reassurance to the public to ensure that this issue will not happen again. So I'm asking you again, Minister, what are you doing to reassure us that our streets can be safe, not just in Dublin, but across the country?
Deputy Minister, please.
Just at the outset, the Garda Commissioner has my full support, and the Garda Commissioner has the full support of this government. What am I doing? I want more Gardaí. We all want more Gardaí. I fully appreciate overtime is not the solution here. We want more Gardaí, and so what I'm doing, I've increased the training allowance already in the budget just gone by 2/3. I've made sure that our new recruits, our new campaign, when it opens up in January, that those over 35 can join. I'm working with Minister Donoghue to make sure that Garda members who are due to retire soon, when they reach 60, that they can stay on for longer. I've worked closely with An Garda Síochána to make sure that the process of Gardaí getting into Templemore is as fast and as quick and as effective as possible. And what we have seen since the first new recruits started last year we have seen an increase in our classes every 3 months. Every 3 months, those numbers have increased. 5,000 people applied to become members of An Garda Síochána in the last recruitment campaign. And because of that, we will see between 700 and 800 new members this year. And I have provided funding to ensure that we have enough money for between 800 and 1,000 next year. And in response to your figures around Dublin, in 2015, when the college opened again for the first time, there were 3,491 members. There are now 3,742. We want more, but I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that we have as many Garda people on the streets.
Deputy McBarry, please.
Minister, I just note the headline this morning. Government may reconsider placing asylum seekers in areas where there is tension, says Minister Coveney. And I put it to you that is bowing to the pressure of the far right, that it will be seen as bowing to the pressure of the far right, and that will encourage the far right to stir up tension and say, see, not here. Minister, there's also reports this morning that the state may not provide accommodation for asylum seekers who come in the next few days. People may end up sleeping rough on the streets. Are the government seriously saying that at a time when people of colour, workers, students, are nervous or afraid to come into town, to walk through town for even 15 or 20 minutes, that you are going to force people to sleep on the streets all night? By the way, in areas where there are particular tensions. Now, last Thursday, a building which recently had been used for asylum seeker accommodation in Parnell Street had all its front windows smashed. In Finglas, a building earmarked for refugee accommodation was set ablaze in a petrol bomb attack. The movement of asylum seekers in Ireland said there is fear and confusion in many direct provision centres. Now, if people living in buildings with locked doors and security staff are feeling fearful, what will it be like for an asylum seeker who's forced to sleep out rough on the streets? Sub-zero temperatures might be the least of their problems. All along the line, Minister, your government has underestimated the far right. And now that they are sufficiently emboldened to pose a real risk to life and limb, you're about to make the same mistakes again. Do you not remember what happened at Sandwich Street last May, Minister? There might as well have been targets painted on the backs of those people. Forced to sleep out in tents, then violently attacked, their tents and belongings burnt out. Now, the Chief Executive of the Irish Refugee Council said this morning that there are 6,000 people in IPAS accommodation who have status, who are legally entitled to source alternative accommodation. But they can't, because there is none. Those are 6,000 places that could avert this crisis, but Fine Gael's housing crisis has knocked that possibility on the head. There is a lot of vacant property in this state, owned by business interests who are speculating on the housing crisis. I support the state taking over that accommodation and using it to accommodate all of the 13,000 people in emergency accommodation, and others, and those who are asylum seekers coming to this state. That's the emergency legislation that we need, not the emergency legislation the government are talking about. Bring it forward and we will happily vote for it. So my question, Minister, is this. Can you give this House a guarantee that no asylum seeker will be denied accommodation and that no asylum seeker will be forced to sleep rough on our streets in the next weeks ahead?
Thank you, Deputy Minister, please.
Thank you, Deputy, and thank you for your question and for raising this issue. Deputy, I think as a country of immigrants, we have always welcomed people into our country, into this country, those who wish to live, who wish to work, who wish to set down roots, but also we have welcomed and will continue to welcome those who seek our help, who seek our assistance, who seek international protection, be it those coming from Ukraine, who are in receipt of temporary protection, or international protection applicants. As a country, we have seen a significant increase in those seeking protection in recent years. We've gone from, on average, about 3,000 people seeking international protection to last year, 15,000 people reaching our shores. This year, to date, over 13,000 people, 10,000 people, and we have, at every step of the way, done everything in our power to ensure that we are committed to and that we respond to our international obligations, and that we provide support, that we provide a roof over people's heads, and that we make sure that people who need our help, that they receive it. And that will not change. Of course there are pressures. If you change and move it from a figure of 3,000 to 15,000 in a year, of course there will be pressures, with 100,000 people coming from Ukraine. But we have responded to this challenge. The people of this country have responded to this challenge, and we will continue to respond to this challenge. Minister O'Gorman, working with his department, but supported by all of government, is working to identify new centres, new accommodation, and yes, that does include tented accommodation. It's not what we would want, but it's better to have a roof over people's head and to support them in whatever way that we can. And yes, there are real pressures at the moment on international protection and accommodation, but let me reassure the Deputy that mitigation measures will be put in place if the Department is unable to provide accommodation for anyone. There will be mitigation measures put in place. We saw that before. That will happen again. And again, to reassure deputies that my department, that on Garda Síochána, are working closely with the international protection system to make sure that any person who is vulnerable, that any person or any centre that is under attack or feels that they may be under attack, that they are supported by members of Garda Síochána. And I will again repeat what I saw last Thursday. When things escalated and where there was concern among the migrant community, members of Garda Síochána responded immediately. And those centres in our city centre where concerns were raised, where people were rightly fearful, members of Garda Síochána responded to keep them safe. And that is the feedback that I have received. Nothing but positivity in terms of the support that people are receiving, not just from Gardaí, but from the vast majority of people in this country. So yes, Deputy, there are significant challenges. I don't think anybody has shied away from that. But we will fulfil our obligations, and we will absolutely make sure that those who are entitled to and those who deserve international protection, that they will receive that from us.
Barry.
Well, Minister, I note the fact that I didn't get a guarantee that people are not going to be forced to sleep rough. You did speak about mitigation measures. You spoke about tented accommodation. You spoke about a roof over the head. Tented accommodation is not a roof over the head, by the way. I think that's an important point. I think it's significant here that while the government are talking about putting on the agenda facial recognition technology, water cannon, stronger pepper spray, more riot police, more dogs, in other words, more state repression, that they are failing to deal with the social crisis in society. Failing to deal with the social crisis in society, failing to deal with the issue of asylum seekers that I've raised, failing to deal with the issue of homelessness that I've raised. And I would make the point that what is needed is precisely the opposite. It's not more law and order and more oppression. It's tackling the social crisis, the issue of asylum seekers, the issue of homelessness, and the housing crisis in our society as well.
Minister, to conclude on this one.
Deputy, to your very point, the very people who you are speaking of, those who are marginalised in our community, those who are seeking international protection, are the very people that those thugs and scumbags on Thursday night sought to intimidate. And the measures that I'm putting in place to support Gardaí, be it more Gardaí themselves, be it better armour, better equipment, be it body cameras, so that they themselves can have a proper account of what's happening, be it facial recognition to make sure that these people are identified as quickly as possible. Whatever it is that Gardaí need, that is to make sure that everybody, not just us, not just those who are born in this country, but that every single person in this country, that they are protected, that we support the Gardaí to do their job in that regard. But again, I will repeat, we have provided accommodation, 10,000 beds for international protection applicants in the last 11 months alone. 5,000 children in the last 2 years have been given accommodation. We will do whatever we can to protect those who need our support. That won't change.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Catherine Connolly, please.
Ara seo lá har a bheith tábhachtach do muintir na Palestína ba deire leis an suscog inniu man i dhéanann Israel don bhrú leanach de rá leis. Comát leis sin is lá faoi lethe seo lá idirnáisiúnta de lú fortiocht le muintir na Palestína atá ag tarlú gach bliain ó 1977 agus comat lei sin ar an lá seo 1947 ghlach an cóhinól generaltas na náisiún Aontaithe le rún a chur tús leis an críoch Giles agus an leis an réiteach dá hir. Minister, today is a very special and important day for the people of Palestine on 3 levels. Today will see the end of the ceasefire unless Israel sees sense. Today and every year since 1977, following the General Assembly decision, we have a solidarity day with the people of Palestine. That in itself tells you something. And on this day, 76 years ago, in 1947, the General Assembly adopted the resolution of the partition of Palestine, a decision that saw a two-state solution put forward as the only solution. And we see the actions and the war of Israel has put an end to a two-state solution. Not alone are they saying that history started on the 7th of October when Hamas, which I have condemned without hesitation, attacked Israel, and they have persisted with a narrative of self-defense. That has been called by the General Secretary of the UN he called the killing of civilians that is unparalleled and unprecedented. 14,800 Palestinians, and that's an underestimated, are reported killed. A substantial number of them are children. 1.7 million displaced. Along with that, the story that's not been reported at all, the West Bank. And if we take West Bank and East Jerusalem together, they're 10% less the size of County Galway. And in that population, we have 3 million people. 700,000 Israeli settlers are in there now in 279 settlements, making a two-state solution impossible or nigh to impossible. Since the 7th of October, 240 people have been killed by mostly settlers in the West Bank, parallel with the slaughter that has taken place in Palestine, Gaza. And I'm here today to say we have to use our voice and not speak out of 2 sides of our mouth or 6 sides of our mouth, as has been happening. And I have praised the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach for their initiative, but that has not continued. We need a ceasefire full stop. We need to call out Israel for what they're doing, and that is the Israeli government and a Prime Minister who's been there for almost 16 years out of 27 years as a Prime Minister, absolutely leading slaughter and the dehumanising language that's going along with that. Am I over time? Thank you, Ken Corley.
Minister, please.
Thank you, Deputy, and thank you for raising this issue. I too want to join you in condemning the actions of Hamas, a terrorist organisation who brutally murdered innocent civilians. I too want to call for a ceasefire. What we're seeing unfold, what we're seeing in response to this brutal attack is devastating. I believe that Israel has gone too far. I've said time and time again, and I think I join with all colleagues here, that they must respond within international law. They must respond within humanitarian law, and what we're seeing does not seem to be in line with that. We've provided additional funding for the International Court. 1.3 million is what would be provided on an annual basis. We've provided 3 million in additional funding for this year to make sure that those who are responsible, potentially, for any crimes, that they're held accountable. The most important thing now, however, is that the ceasefire that we have called for, that this happens, that the pause that has happened, which I think we are all very happy to see that continues, that the continued release of hostages, that continues. We are all overjoyed that Emily Hand, an Irish citizen, was released, that many other citizens were released, but it is so important that not only are those citizens released, but that there is continued aid, that there is resources, that there is food, that there is fuel sent to the many hundreds of thousands of millions of people in Gaza who need our support and who need help. We have been united, and we have been clear in that message all along. The Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, and I think the vast majority of people in this House, we have been clear in our support for those citizens, and we have been clear in our support and our calling for a ceasefire, and that will not change. The Taoiseach has engaged extensively with his colleagues. The Taoiseach has engaged extensively with his colleagues, not just for the release of hostages, not just to ensure that humanitarian aid is provided on the ground, but to make sure that we have a ceasefire so that we can all collectively work towards a solution. As a country, as a government, we have always said that solution is a two-state solution. That has not changed. I know for many it seems an impossibility at this moment in time, but the time will come where this discussion can be had and where it should be had, and it's so important that we are part of that. So our voice will remain strong on the world stage, on the European stage, and I have no doubt that our Taoiseach and our Taoiseach and all of us, as we engage with our colleagues at a European level and beyond, that we continue to call for a ceasefire, for the release of all hostages, for the immediate aid that is needed by so many hundreds of thousands of millions of people, and that this fighting can come to an end.
Connolly.
Minister, I've done my best in 3 minutes to give you a background, and still you stand up and condemn Hamas without condemning what the Israeli army are doing or the government. That's talking out of 6 sides. I did listen. You have not condemned the actions of Israel nor the army. Let me quote to you in the time I have. 36 UN experts raised the alarm about the risk of genocide on the 16th of November. Professor William Shabbos, a professor of international law, also raised what was happening in terms of genocide. Going back, Amnesty told you, and nobody has come back in relation to the report, that Israel are operating an apartheid system. The UN Watch, the Human Rights Watch, has told you repeatedly what's happening there. I'm outlining to you what's happening in the West Bank that's gone under the radar completely. And we have Israel that's waiting for the shaking of the heads tells its own story when you cannot listen to facts. I'm sticking to facts. Israel can't wait to go back on the pretense of getting rid of Hamas, and what they're really doing is destroying Palestine and the Palestinian people while you nod and shake your heads in relation to it. It is time to stand together and make words mean something. Stop the slaughter and have a ceasefire that allows for a plan, a comprehensive peace plan. That's the very least that this neutral country should be doing.
Minister, please.
And I think that's what I've just done. I think that's what I've said a number of times in my short contribution, that we as a country, one of the first countries to call for a ceasefire. We have consistently called for a ceasefire. We have consistently repeated that what Israel is doing is going too far. We have consistently said that they have a right to defend themselves. It is not for us in this chamber to decide that. It is not for us in this chamber to decide that. We have provided funding to the experts who will decide this. The most important thing here is that hostages are released, that the hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians receive the aid that they need, and that this fighting stops. That is what we all want in this chamber. The only way that that will happen is if we continue to call for a ceasefire, if we use our voice, and as small as we might be, I think our voice has always been strong on these issues around the table. If we continue to use our voice in the way that we have, that is the only way in which this fighting will stop. And we will be sure to be around the table when it does, to make sure that a solution that focuses on peace, that is the way forward.
That concludes Leaders' Questions for today, and we move to questions on promised legislation. Deputy Denise Mitchell, please.